1975 is the first year I started investing. It also coincidentally was the year that Jack Bogle created the first index fund. Unfortunately for me, I didn't know that. And even if I'd known that, I wouldn't have been nearly smart or wise enough to have taken advantage of it. So even if I'd known it, you'll understand why I say that in a moment. So I invested mostly in picked individual stocks, and then by extension, mutual funds that were run by actively managed mutual funds. So I was also trying to pick fund managers who would outperform, and my whole way of thinking was outperforming. And that's one of the reasons I have very little patience for people who make that argument today against indexing. Is not only have I heard those arguments in the past, I used to make the same ones.
Okay.
And I was slow and stubborn in clinging to that. So you fast forward about 10 years to call it 1985, I think was around the time that I first became aware of index funds. So, and as I recall, there was a friend of mine who came out of the University of Chicago and was a financial analyst, and that's where he came across them, and he, because he's smarter than I am, adapted to them immediately and presented them to me, and I just was unable to accept the wisdom. And I've given that a lot of thought, because I come across people now who are unable to accept the wisdom, and I think it's a problem with candidly smart people, because it's the power of indexing is in some ways counterintuitive, because the idea that you can't outperform a basket of stocks just seems, at least it seemed to me, and from what I hear, again, I hear the same arguments I used to be made, I now hear being made, and it just seems like, gee, if I just avoid the bad companies, obviously I'm going to outperform. You know, if I just don't buy the obvious dogs, I'll do better than the market. Or if I just focus on, the really successful companies. And of course, the problem with that is that the obvious dogs are tomorrow's exciting turnaround story, and the great performers today are, the ones that flame out and die over time.
Yeah.
And but that takes, that takes a long time to appreciate, and it took me at least another 10, maybe even 15 years after learning about index funds to accept them. And part of the problem is that it's not that picking individual stocks doesn't work, and it's not that picking individual managers doesn't work. I, in fact, achieved financial independence doing that. I didn't actually achieve it picking index funds. I came to index funds after I was financially independent. Okay. But looking back on it very clearly, I would have gotten there sooner and with a lot less effort. And I would have a lot more today if I had adopted index funds the moment I heard about them, or even in a perfect world, if I'd heard about them in 1975 and was smart enough to adopt them. But that's the other reason that people are slow to people who tout stock, active management and stock picking. I think one of the challenges is it's not that it doesn't work. I mean, if you do it well, if you do it poorly, then you just get killed. But if you're good at it, if you put a lot of time and effort into it, it can work. It's just not going to work as well, and it's going to take longer and a lot more effort and more expense and blah blah blah. So So I finally came to indexing. I don't even remember exactly when, but so I now kind of laugh when I hear the arguments against it, because it's my own voice in my head that I hear, and and I don't care. I mean,
you don't listen to yourself anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I had to spend 20, 30 years figuring out, then why should I give these people who want to fight with me the easy short path. You know, go ahead, you spend 20, 30 years figuring it out.
So that's, Jim, that's really, really interesting to me. So there's so many like different nuances to it. So your investment catalyst was individual stocks, mutual funds, looking for the best actively managed funds or what have you, the best manager out there who's going to outperform the market. And literally that was your early retirement blueprint. That's where your investment catalyst was. And today, it's not a 180 per se, but it's definitely a different investing philosophy that you are now saying today that, hey, you know what? Had I started all over again today, I would have went essentially, to probably coin your phrase, but I would take the simple path, I would take the easy path, and I think I would have done better. Which is, again, that's a really big statement to me, especially for something that worked.
So I it's not that I think I would have done better. There's no question that I would have done better, and there's copious amounts of research that indicate that everybody would do better, because stock picking and active management is simply a subpar approach. Now, again, it doesn't mean, I think people get confused because they think that when you say that, it means that it doesn't work at all. And it does work. It just doesn't work as well, and it takes a lot more effort. So if you were a runner, right, and you were being trained, and you were competing, and you had a trainer that used the equivalent of active management and stock picking in your training, he or she could turn you into a great runner. But if you're forced to compete with somebody who was trained by an index investor, you're going to lose the race, and you're going to lose it every time over. It's a bad analogy because, of course, the race is a very finite amount of time and is over, and indexing outperforms over time rather than in short periods of time. But to beat it to death, you're going to lose the race. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to get around the track. It doesn't mean that you're going to lose the race necessarily by a wide margin. You might, only be 20% behind, the indexer. So you will get there. I got there with it. Mm-hmm. I achieved financial independence. It was just a whole lot more work and effort, and for less results. And I frequently say, because on the blog, all the time I get people who say, well, what if we did this? And what if we did that? And I'm always saying, believe me, if I thought for a moment that there was a more powerful way than indexing, not easier, but more powerful, I would be happy to put in the extra effort for the extra gain. But indexing is more powerful. And, by the way, it happens to be a whole lot easier, a whole lot simpler. And that's hard for people to wrap their heads around, because if you go back to the racing, if you're going to be an athlete in any sport, the harder you train, the more you do, the better result by and large you'll get. But in investing, the irony is the less you do and the less you fool around with it, if you get a couple of key things right, like choosing a broad-based index fund. I tell my daughter, buy VTSAX and dump as much in it as you can whenever you can, and hold it forever. And don't worry about anything else. That's all you need to do. And the great irony is that she doesn't care about investing, so she will outperform the vast majority of my readers who are kind of really into investing, because if you're really into it, you almost can't help but tinker with it. And even after I discovered investing and was not investing, but indexing, and I was completely convinced that it was the superior way, for years I'd still fool around with individual stocks because, I'd done it for a long time and it was fun. And it's only, I don't know, I probably haven't owned an individual stock in the last 5 years maybe, but that means that for the first 10 years or so of embracing indexing, I was still fooling around with. Now, they were a tiny part of my portfolio at that point.
Right. Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I stopped fooling around with them, is I thought, I'm never going to put enough money into this stock that is really going to move the needle on my portfolio, because I don't really believe in it. And so why am I bothering? So anyway,
Yeah.
like I said at the beginning, I'm a slow learner.
Yeah, I would say I do a little bit of the same. It is with a small amount of my portfolio, but it's tough to get away. And I don't know if I will, and I don't know if I want to, but I mean, to each their own, of course.
Well, the other problem is that if you get it right, if you get a stock and it takes off, because individual stock, I've had individual stocks that vastly outperform the market, but that's not the point. It's not a matter of finding one. I mean, your whole portfolio has to outperform the market to make it the more effective strategy. But when you have a stock that you get right, you do the work on it and it works, and it starts to ramp up and outperform. There are not a whole lot of feelings that are better, and it's the same attraction in Las Vegas.
Yeah, you pick a winner, right?
Yeah, that's why Vegas only skims off something like 3 or 4%, because they want people winning on the floor, because that inspires other people to keep betting. And if they just win 2 or 4% more than the people in the casino, they have the money to build $1 billion casinos.
Yeah, they're very nice. They're very nice. I've been there once or twice.
Right. So there you go.
But so now you kind of did. You said you heard about it in 1975. You had
that's when I heard about it around 1985.
Okay.
The first one was launched in 75.
Got it. And then in 1985, heard about it through, it was a professor at the University of Chicago?
No, it was a friend of mine who had gone into had become a financial analyst.
Okay. So 1985, and then you said it took you another 10 to 15 years before you really turned you flipped the switch and you went to index fund investing.
Right.
Was there someone who specifically influenced you to do that? Or, I mean, was it that individual? Was it just time that really told you, hey, maybe it is time to do it?
No, so I, giving myself a little bit of credit when my buddy's name was Al, and when Al first told me about indexing and the theory behind it, that the markets, the long term, you can't outperform the markets for a variety of reasons. I mean, I did listen to what he had to say, and I had trouble accepting it, but I kept thinking about it, and it just took me a long time to finally accept it. But I kept thinking about it, and I also kept, I like a lot of people that I hear in the FI movement now, and that I sometimes see in my blog, if they're looking for the magic bullet, the thing that will outperform, and I spent a lot of time, I kept hoping I'd find that, but at the same time, as I kept thinking about it, and I suppose as my maturity and my experience deepened, it just eventually you have to accept it. I mean, because the evidence is just there if you're willing to look at it. So it's just like I said, I'm a slow learner. But that's the bad news. Good news is I do learn. I do learn.
Right. That is good.
Yeah. Sometimes I had a comment on the blog the other day, and this guy was talking. He sounds like a very young guy in his 20s or something, and how he's embraced indexing, and partially because of my writings. And I think, man, he's going to be so far ahead of the curve by the time, he's 30, 40, 50, my age. And I wish somebody in 1975 had been there to tell me, and in a way that was persuasive enough that I would have accepted it.
Yeah. It's, I mean, you hear it all the time though. It's, essentially, I wish that I would have, I wish I would listen. I wish I was your age type of thing.
Right.
It is, at that point, you just kind of have to face it and say, you know what, as long as I'm acting today, Like I'm doing something. I am making the right move. It's so hard sometimes to get past that other than to like, hey, let's move forward and let's do the right thing moving forward.
You know, you're Stephen, you're absolutely right. And it's almost become a joke because on my blog, you know, I get the 60-year-olds who will say, man, I wish I'd found your blog when I was 50. And the 50-year-olds are, man, I wish I'd found it when I was 40. And the 40-year-olds, I wish I'd found it when I was 30. And the 30-year-olds are, I wish I'd found it when I was 20. And the 20-year-olds, I wish I'd found this in high school. And the high schoolers are, I wish I'd found this when I was in kindergarten. And the kindergartners are, I wish my mom had been playing this to me when I was in the womb. You know?
I like that. I like that. If only.
Yeah, right. If only.
Good stuff.
But I confess, I get a little thrill, especially because I have had the occasional high school student who will say, I've read your book and, you know, I'm already working and investing. And you know, so when somebody really young, high school, college, 20s, you know, tells me that they're following the path, it gives me a special thrill because they're just off to such an early and fast start. And, you know, it's like my own daughter who's doing the same. So,
yeah, I mean, being able to help other people, it's really, you know, I'll say it's a special thrill in a way, just because, you know, you see someone kind of that aha moment and they light up a little bit when they're talking about it. And you kind of see them go from, you know, potentially from point A to point all the way to point Z. And, you know, you hear some of their journey along the way. And yeah, I'm with you. It kind of lights you up a little bit and puts a smile on your face when you hear what's happening. But, well, I wanted to ask one more question. Just kind of, it goes into really, what are you doing moving forward? And I asked that in the idea of, you talked about individual stocks, you talked about mutual funds, we've talked about index funds. Where is Jim Collins currently? Well, since you are already, you know, you've reached financial independence. I can use the term early retirement. You just talked about your vacation home, so I can use that term. What are you doing moving forward, creating passive income where you are today?
Well, you know, in terms of the investing side, you know, I am, and when I say all, I'm referring to my wife and myself. So we each have an IRA and a Roth IRA, and then we have a joint account. And then we have, you know, a checking account that we keep money in to pay the bills.
Sure.
And we are in VTSAX, which is the Total Stock Market Index Fund, and a little less than 20% now in VBTLX, which is the Total Bond Fund.
Okay.
And I think I'm probably going to leave that alone. Now, the other thing that's happened that was unexpected and just in the last few years, starting in 2016, well, I started monetizing. I'm thinking this through, Stephen. So I started monetizing the blog probably around 2013 or 14, because I never, you know, I only created the blog as a way to archive this information for my daughter.
Right.
And I'd never seen a blog before I created my own. I kind of vaguely knew what one was, and I created it literally as an archive. And one of my friends that I shared some of the information with said, you know, this is pretty interesting, and your friends and relatives might be interested. So if you're going to create the blog, you might want to send an email around to them and share it. And so I said, okay, I'll do that. And it just slowly began to develop an audience, which I never expected. And when I started the blog, it was on WordPress and it was free. It didn't cost me anything. But as the audience grew, WordPress couldn't handle it anymore. And then I had to go out and find an outside, I'm not even sure what the term is, a host, I guess.
Yeah.
I had to find nice. So suddenly, you know, it was costing me $150 a year or something. And okay, I'm not happy about that, but it's only $150. but then the audience, because these things snowball, and then next thing I knew, I had outgrown that, and I had to find a more robust host. That was $150 a month instead of a year, and I thought, well, I don't want to be that much out of pocket. So I started figuring out how to monetize it a little bit, and then it kept growing, and I got better at monetizing. And anyway, the monetization on the graph grew much more steeply than the expenses, although they kept growing. But anyway, so suddenly the blog, in the first couple of years, I was reporting a small loss on it, and but around 2016, it started making money, and that's the same. In the spring of 2016 is when I published my book, and the books turned out to be much more successful than I expected. So suddenly, beginning in 2016, it's turned into a nice little business, a nice little revenue stream that I no longer tap into the portfolio at all, which was completely unexpected. And I mean, obviously a nice thing. So, yeah, so I mean, I have the index funds, and I'll continue to hold those even though we're not tapping into them. I might even at some point go 100% in stocks, seeing as we're not tapping into it, but I just haven't pulled that trigger yet. And the blog revenue and the book royalties, they both keep getting stronger, but it seems to me like they're things that could go away at any time. So that's one of the reasons I think I haven't sold off the bond position, because I guess in the back of my head, I think, well, that this current business income is destined to drift away, and then I'll be back to living on the portfolio. And when you're living on the portfolio, a chunk of bonds makes sense. So I don't know. Does that make any sense at all? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what's interesting too is, I mean, it's, in some ways you're using, you ended up, whether it be accidentally or not, you created 1 to 2 extra passive income streams. Now, we don't know if they're going to last into perpetuity,
Right.
Infinity or what have you, but the fact that they're there now, and it's in a way, it's kind of acting as that buffer until, possibly that it goes away, or until you feel comfortable enough that you want to raise your expenses higher or buy something and, and use that money, in a vacation home in Europe. You never know, Jim. You never know.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't, for a long time, we haven't really denied ourselves anything. I always throw the caveat out, though, that there's not very much we want either. So it's not like, we're not yacht and mansion and private airplane people. But, we fly first class, for instance, when we fly, because it's something we can easily afford. But that was true before the blog and the book came around. So, but you're right. We do have a couple of accidental revenue streams. The beach house, if all goes well, will be a little bit of a revenue stream. Now, again, my ambitions for it are modest. I would just like to see it generate enough revenue to pay the real estate tax and the maintenance cost on it. And so I'm not out of it. Same thing with the blog. My sole goal to begin with is I didn't want to be out of pocket doing this.
Yeah.
So I would like to own the beach house without, seeing as it's not a permanent residence, without being out of pocket, so that it doesn't cost me anything to own it. And then I just got a nice place to hang out for, 4 months out of the year. And we'll see if that works, so, but yeah, it's not the beach house. We didn't buy the beach house with the idea of generating a new income stream that would cover our living expenses. Right. Other than the fact that when we're living here, we don't have, the cost of Airbnbs and, where we live when we're on the road. So,
sure.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, that is everything that I had for you. I appreciate you answering the questions, helping others. I think really my goal is to help others grow their knowledge. You know, I think that is a big factor in growing your wealth as well. You know, the more you know, the more informed decisions you're making with your money. So I appreciate it greatly. I enjoy everything that you do with the blog, with the book. Um, uh, Read both of them. So
Well,
I'm
thank
with
you.
you.